Whether you're on Zoom or here in the room, part of our practice is learning to be at ease, learning to be tender at all times. Even as we're waiting, we hear the sounds of people coming into the room, or you hear whatever you're hearing, those of you at home. One of the things that we often miss in life, I speaking for myself, is how functional, practical it is to be tender, to be kind. When we think about those places in our lives where we have to wait, and just how easy it is for us to justify being tight, being aversive even if it's just a subtle way. Oh, come on, let's get on with this. And there's always this option for our mind, our heart to be tender. Just tender with the understanding, direct from our own experience, that it isn't easy being a human being. And as a human being, it isn't easy being in relationship with everyone, as we inevitably are. Our families and friends and the whole world. I think one of the things life teaches us, whether we have a Buddhist practice or not, just anybody who's sensitive enough to let life teach them something, it teaches us that only kindness in the end makes sense. And exactly how or what that kindness feels like, looks like, of course, will be specific to each moment's experience. But we learn ill will doesn't make sense. It hurts. Kindness makes sense. It feels good to be kind toward ourselves, toward the moment. That doesn't mean we let life or others take advantage of us. It just means that we learn how to take care of ourselves and everybody else with kindness, not with ill will. And this is something that we can check out, just like even now we'll be sitting for about 30 minutes in our meditation time. Sitting up, encouraging this alert, open, even vulnerable presence with the body, of course, feeling the body, feeling what's here to feel in the body. Feeling what's moving in our heart and mind. And this is our training ground. Right? We'll see, we'll sense in moments the tendency to be relating with control, with aversion, with denial, distraction. And we just will learn directly, well, that doesn't really help. And even as we feel the breath coming in, feel the breath going out, and the other aspects of our sitting experience, right? Just what's moving in our body. Can we relate? Can we be with these experiences with kindness? Understanding that sometimes it's like this, feels like this. It's so easy, for example, to think we should be at war with the sounds we're hearing, or the thoughts, memories that might be arising in our mind. Oh, I don't want to be thinking that. See if you can come back, uncover this way of being present that's tender and kind with your own experience here. So it has the flavor of forgiveness and patience and understanding, and even a wholesome sense of humor about our exposure that just naturally comes with being human. We're exposed to our own conditioning and the wider conditioning of the world we inhabit. All that's moving internally, externally. Breathing in, noticing this capacity we all have to be relating with tenderness, kindness. Breathing out, noticing that kind way of being present, patient and open, willing to be close to what's moving now. You don't have to figure anything out. It's the being present itself that is the expression of the kindness. The willingness to see and feel whatever's moving. So as we're breathing in, we can reflect and even repeat the phrase, something like, caring enough to open, to feel. Just as a reminder, caring enough to be close, caring enough to be open, to feel what's here to feel. You can just choose a little of that to repeat to yourself from time to time. And then with the exhalations, you might just reflect, caring enough to just let things be, to not be in conflict with what's moving now in the moment. So with the in-breath, something like caring enough to feel what's here to feel. And with the out-breaths, caring enough to let things be. To drop any conflict, any need to control or fix or judge. Putting down what's capable, what we're capable of putting down. So let's continue now in silence. So take a moment, stretch the body a little if you need to. Good to see everybody here, all of you on Zoom joining us, all the folks here in the room. It's good to reflect just with gratitude that we can come together like this. It's an unusual thing for a group of people to come together and be silent for a period of time. A lot of people get confused about the emphasis, I guess you could say, of silent meditation practice. And they can overgeneralize, oh, so the strategy, for happiness is to not have to interact. If only I didn't have to interact with human beings, I'd be so happy. But remember the form of sitting meditation practice, which is a big deal in Buddhist practice. It's what we call a skillful means, right? Because it's a useful training ground, you could say, to see what we haven't seen about the nature of our mind, the nature of experience, the nature of how stress, suffering, greed, hatred, and delusion arises, and how it can cease. Right? We learn about the important things. And it's a relatively simplistic training ground, right? The rest of the day is the more complicated training ground. We're doing the same practice all the way through. It's just that it's really skillful. It's really good to put aside part of the day so that the conditions are relatively simple to train in a better understanding how it is that suffering arises and how it is that suffering ceases. We could want to approach, the great question of inequities about who has resources, who has less or no resources. For example, that's a complex issue. It's like what to do about that. But we begin to discover the root of that, all those other ways that suffering moves in our wider world and our communities by just seeing within our own heart and mind greed, aversion, fear, hate arising in moments, right? And ceasing in other moments. Well, that's how all of the other suffering comes to be too. It's just the cumulative expression of greed, hatred, and delusion, which we can observe directly, immediately in our own experience. Some of us, we're here in the room, and inevitably folks are coming late, so here we are, trying to sit, and there's sounds of people coming into the room. And it's very easy to feel as if the sounds are my enemy, the sounds that people make, or somebody's phone goes off or something like that. It's me against that sound, or me against the people making those sounds. And all of a sudden, if we're wise, we can realize the war is here in my heart, in my mind, right? Sound is just sound. But the not liking of the sound, the thinking that the sound is out to get me, that's happening in my mind, my heart. And there's a choice of how we relate. Same thing with the pain in our knee or in our back, or if we're sleepy, or we drink too much coffee and we're restless, or whatever difficult experience that we're dealing with, there's painful memories, or we're worried about the world, or worried about a loved one, right? And that comes in. How do we relate? Do we relate in a way that creates a war in our heart, in our mind? Is there another way to be relating? I've been thinking a lot about this question about how to address the suffering in our lives and the suffering in our wider world. It's relevant to me. I feel moved and touched by my own suffering and the suffering in our wider world, as we all should be, right? I mean, for me, a basic definition of mental health is that there's enough sensitivity to care about my suffering and the suffering of others, right? Oh, it's like this. To have a more, not perfect, but a more honest relationship to the heaviness, the darkness, the ache in my own heart, and to sense the darkness, the heaviness, the ache in those around us, all around us, near and far. And we often miss that first step. We want to go right to resolving the ache in our heart or the ache in the world because we feel threatened by it. But the first step is actually to learn how to get close to the experience of suffering, our suffering and the wider suffering. We don't really have the capacity to be creative and to respond in a way that might actually support the alleviation of suffering for ourselves and others unless we're really clear and close and intimate. Or as one teacher said, right in the downtown of suffering. Doesn't mean we have to go looking for it, right? It's already here, the truth of suffering. But it's really about transforming our relationship to it. It's like if we reflect, what is the missing ingredient? We look at our lives, our own personal lives, with more honesty. We look at the world with more humility and more receptivity and honesty. What is the missing ingredient? The habitual response is, well, if only those people didn't do what they're doing, right? Or if only I didn't have to live with my body the way it is, or live in the world that I'm living in. If only I could get the heck out of here in one way or another. But the Buddha's response to that question, what's the missing ingredient? Or, another way of asking it, what's the proximate cause for the suffering? And it's ignorance. He would answer ignorance. It's the not seeing things as they are that leads our lives to be animated by greed and hatred and fear and delusion, disconnection, denial, the different expressions of delusion. One of the early talks from the Buddha to some folks, a big group of people early on when he had started teaching. Some of they say, the tradition around 29, at the age of 29, he left his family to become a full-time spiritual seeker. And in about 6 years, he had a deep awakening, deep insight, and then became a teacher and wandered around in northern India for 45 years teaching. So early on in that teaching period, there's this famous discourse he gave. And interestingly, these people had been, as a lot of the folks were at the time, they were embedded in sort of yogic mysticism, Brahmanism, what we maybe today call Hinduism. It was this worship of the fire. The fire was sort of a sacred image. And so he turned it around a little bit with this fire sermon. It's called Practitioners, All is Burning. And what practitioners is the all that is burning? The eye is burning, visual forms are burning, the consciousness of visual form is burning, eye contact is burning, and whatever feeling arises due to eye contact as a condition, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, that too is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of greed, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion. Burning with birth, aging, and death, with sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, I say. And then he goes on The same thing with the other sense gates. So this is an important list. It's an obvious list. The 5 physical senses, plus we're also sensitive to mental activities. And these 6 things are the ways we're sensitive to the world, through sight, through sound, through smell, through taste, through touch, and through knowing mental activities. And he's saying the same thing, that all 6 of these, the sensitivity to sight, the sight itself, the consciousness of that, any feeling we have due to the experience of sight, same with sound, same with smell, same with taste, same with touch, and same with mental activities. All of it is burning. Seeing thus, practitioners, a wise, noble practitioner experiences disenchantment toward the eye, towards forms, towards eye consciousness, towards eye contact, towards whatever feeling arises, whether pleasant, painful, or neutral. Experiences disenchantment towards the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, toward whatever feeling arises due to sense contact as a condition. Experiencing disenchantment, they become dispassionate. Through dispassion, the heart is liberated. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge it is liberated. They understand birth is finished. And that's sort of Buddhist code, that last phrase, birth is finished, because it's like, what does the Buddha mean by birth is finished? But it's really this fear, like birth comes with death. So this whole, we don't really always have a clear sense that our mortality and the identification, like I am that thing that was born and then will die, it's a big part of what drives us to do what we're doing in life. I say this, used to say this pretty often, but what really got me started on my Buddhist path way back in 1982 or somewhere around there, I read that book that was quite well known at the time, The Denial of Death by Ernst Becker. Some of you maybe have seen that book. I think he won the Pulitzer Prize for it back maybe in the late 60s, early 70s when it was written. But he talks about just that, the power, in our psyche of fear of death, basically, and how it drives so much of what we do in life. And that gets resolved in our practice, that fear of death, that dependence on existence, that just the way our mind, our heart relates to existence comes just naturally, given how we're conditioned with a grip. And that's why, that's why we justify greed, because we're trying to hold on to something that can't be held on to. Existence, life, health, my wealth, all these things, my status even. Think about the problems in the world and all the ways we justify terrible things. And it all arises out of that grip of somebody wants to survive, right? It's just the animal survival instinct on steroids, because we humans, we have this capacity to proliferate around survival. And when is it enough? We see people with tremendous power, tremendous resources. Now they want to be able to be, there was that article in the news when people gathered in China, the head of Russia and I think the head of India were there with the president in China, and there was a hot mic, and they overheard them talking about what the research about freezing their bodies so they can have eternal existence or something like that. I forget the details of the article. Maybe some of you saw it, but it was like an accidental recording of what the top leaders of the world were talking about, right? People with the most resources and power, not satisfied, don't feel safe. It's not over yet. We don't actually become safe by pursuing even things as wholesome as health. It's good to pursue health, but we shouldn't imagine that doing exercise, eating good food, getting good sleep somehow makes us immune from insecurity and vulnerability. So, in our Buddhist practice, what we're relying on is this insight into the unconditioned. And the trouble with deep insight is we don't know what that is. I mean, we hear it, we can have some sense intellectually, but we don't understand its transformative power until we have deep insight. And that's a real setup for us. It's like, the Buddha can't transmit his own insight, his own confidence to us. We have to check it out. That's one of the phrases that we hear from the Buddha and then in various ways passed down to our, teachers, but basically encouraging us to check it out. You have to check it out. Because if we don't check it out, we do what we've always done and we get the results what we've always gotten in the past. And the way that's described in the text is these repeated cycles of suffering, samsara. This is from a sutta, one of the discourses. How do you construe this, practitioners? Which is greater, the tears you have shed while transmigrating and wandering this long time? Rebirths, doing the same thing, getting the same results. And he goes on crying and weeping from being joined with what is displeasing, from being separated from what is pleasing, or the water in the great oceans, right? What is greater? All the tears we've shed by being separated from what we love and being joined to what we don't love, the unpleasant, right? Or the water in the four great oceans. This is greater, the tears you have shed. Why is that? From an inconstruable beginning, practitioners, comes this cycling of samsara, the cycles of suffering. A beginning point is not evident. Though beings hindered by ignorance, fettered by craving, are transmigrating and wandering on, long have you thus experienced stress, experienced pain, experienced loss, swelling the cemeteries long enough to become disenchanted with all conditioned things, enough to become dispassionate, enough to become released. Now this, again, it's easy to misunderstand this because the mind, because it doesn't understand like that experience of being embodied, being a human being in relationship with each other, having duties and responsibilities. It's easy to imagine the Buddha saying, not that. But it's something more subtle that he's pointing to, like in the context of being human, in the context of me having the conditioned personality that I have, the karmic responsibilities that I have in my life, feeling touched by the suffering that's around me, in me. In the context of all of that, what is dispassion? What is disenchantment? Right? There's something very specific that is being released. And you could call it, like through practice, the wrong understanding of the experience of suffering. So I want to say a little bit more about this. And one of the things that, we talk about just in terms of the stress response, like when we're triggered, activated in life, we used to hear about fight or flight, right? That was back when I was a kid, that was the stress response. Now there's two more F's. There's fight, there's flight, there's freeze, and one of the ones I've heard more recently is follow. And they all make a lot of sense to me. Like when we're being triggered, when we're being activated, we lose the capacity to be really there in our lives, nimble, free of attachment, free of fear. So we're more able to be nimble and creative as we take care of everybody, including ourselves, not neglecting ourselves. We don't get caught in the freeze, like where we gravitate towards numbness, like it's too much, can't deal with it. And part of freeze is like all the ways we disconnect, whether it's like we drink too much or we watch too much TV or, there's any number of ways to numb out. Or we follow, like there's got to be somebody who knows what I should do, right? And we become susceptible to people who pretend that they know what they're doing, and who speak with a very strong confidence, whether that confidence is deserved or not. And we see that in our world today, everywhere, not just on one side of the equation, right? People are looking for somebody who thinks they know. Buddha, as you probably remember, had a very strong caution against fixed views. Like just anybody with fixed views, like it's probably not the case. Anybody who has certainty, we should be suspect, because does this world seem to you to lend itself to certainty? No, it's confusing and it's complex. And it's easy, like this divisiveness, it's easy to turn things into good and bad, but that's sort of taking care of this anxiety, like because I don't know, I feel anxious. So I turn things into good and bad, and at least I know who's good and who's bad. So there's a semblance on the surface of security because we think we know. Okay, I'm with these folks, I'm not with those folks. But it doesn't actually take care of the anxiety. And there's a lot of anxiety in maintaining that dualistic sense of the world, of good and bad. So we have freeze, we have follow, we have fight, where we don't want to feel helpless, we just want to do something. And we catch ourselves, like sometimes where this can be obvious, it's not just, in terms of wanting to respond to the suffering in the world by becoming an activist, but even in a very personal situations where, let's say somebody is really sick, a good friend or a family member, and it's like this noticing this neurotic need to do something instead of just being able to be with them and learn, and it is a learning to not be afraid of the uncertainty of the situation or that person's suffering. Just because they're really hurting doesn't mean we can't be close and express, like model to some degree, non-fear with their suffering. That is a way to alleviate their suffering, and definitely to alleviate our own suffering, is to realize I can be close without being afraid of all the uncertainty in your life, all the suffering you're going through right now. Because it's adding to that person's suffering for me to come in with, even though we'd never say it out loud, but some sense of, your suffering is really bothering me. Stop it. Basically, that's how we feel sometimes. We just have to be honest. But then that's our responsibility. Like, how can I be showing up in a different way where I'm not telling them, your suffering is bothering me, it's got to stop. It's like, I want your suffering to be alleviated, but it may be alleviated or it may not, just depending on so many causes and conditions, which probably nobody's in control of totally, how this plays out. But I'm going to learn how I aspire to being with you no matter how this plays itself out. Right? That's a beautiful thing. And that should be our relationship to this world. Whether you're moved by the climate crisis and want to respond, or moved by the various injustices that are reverberating in our world, locally, globally, I'm in it. No matter how this thing plays itself out, I want to alleviate suffering, but I want to be showing up in a way that doesn't depend on any way that it plays itself out, because I don't know how it's going to play itself out. And I want to be here, not contributing, but alleviating suffering, no matter how it plays itself out. This is what real compassion is. Otherwise, it's this aversion masquerading as compassion. And I think we know a little bit, we've had, all of us, I think, experiences of what in Buddhism we call the unconditioned. So the freedom, the release, you could even say happiness or peace that isn't dependent on conditions. Like sometimes we experience love and it's very much dependent on the particular conditions. Like this person seems to want to be with me and hang out with me, and I really love them. But then there's like my cat, which doesn't necessarily want to be with me. But I have a lot of love for, we have a very independent cat, and I can love that too. Or just even beings that we're not even in relationship with, right? Isn't that possible? Like you're just at a playground and you're seeing a couple kids playing, and there can be moments where the love is really unconditional. You're not expecting anything back. There's no business relationship between you, like I'll love you if you keep entertaining me or anything like that. It's just this pure generosity, the love that we feel sometimes for the world, for all things even. And same thing with other wholesome aspects, like we know contentment when it's conditioned. Like I feel really content because I have my favorite warm drink and I've got my favorite entertainment in front of me. I'm on my favorite chair, my favorite time of day when I don't have anything I have to do. Yeah, I feel content. So that's what we would call contentment arising because of conditions. It's conditional. But there's also contentment that's unconditioned, that not needing the moment to be different, even when the circumstances or the demands that we're experiencing are intense, right? Yeah, I can handle this. The release of discontentment, the decision, in a sense, to not go down that road towards being discontent. Haven't you experienced sometimes in the busyness of your day contentment? Like you're not fighting, you decide wisely to not be at war with having duties and responsibilities, right? Because it doesn't make sense. Like if we're going to have those duties and responsibilities, why spend our life being at war with them? We decide to have kids, and then we're at war with the duties and responsibilities that come. Or we decide we want a paycheck at the end of the month, and yet we're at war with what that implies. Or we decide to care about a particular issue and get involved, then why feel burdened, right? Why not, like you can even look right now, is something in the way of contentment now for us? Because a lot of times we think in this conditional way, like I can't be content until this is over and I'm home again, and then I'll be content. We postpone it, or we think it's based on particular circumstances. But it's really a failure of imagination. So it's true with love, it's true with peace and contentment and generosity and all of the wholesome qualities. We want to start uncovering how these can be unconditional, because that's the direction of our Buddhist practice. And you see, that's what really frees us up to be responsive in this fearless, nimble, creative way. Otherwise, we move through the world in the things we care about and where we engage, that it's everything's in terms of a business relationship, like I'm really trying to feed something here that needs to be fed. So I'm going to get involved in this romantic relationship, or I'm going to get involved in this community, or I'm going to get involved in this business opportunity, money-making opportunity. And we're basically operating in the world. It's totally understandable, and we're all doing it to a large degree, but we're operating in the world as a hungry, desperate animal, which is okay, because we are a hungry, desperate animal a lot of the time. But we don't have to be limited by that destiny of being a hungry, desperate animal, afraid of our survival, right? There is a way to transcend that through understanding. And the first thing we do is we start to notice dukkha, right? We notice the suffering, the heaviness of operating in the world in the ways that we've been conditioned to operate in the world. Like those of us who have been in, like I have, I've been married for 33 years or so. And, in the early years, it's just so obvious, this business-like relationship, like, what am I getting from this relationship? What am I putting in? Is that in balance? How can I get more than I'm giving? No, not that we'd say that out loud, but that's operating in our mind. Sometimes it bursts to the surface and we see it, but it's just there, that sort of, is this fair? Is it fair? And I'm not saying that it's irrelevant, right? It's relevant in the realm of being a hungry, desperate animal. It's totally relevant. But it's not the whole truth. It's part of the truth, but it's not the whole truth. And the more we become sort of present and fearless and taking in, let's say, the bigger picture, right? We start seeing other possibilities with how we relate. Like, if I'm feeling a sense of wholeness, fullness from another source, then I'm less dependent on my partner to make me happy, or less dependent on the food in my refrigerator to make me happy, or my vacation, or my money in my bank, or the world being the way I think the world should be to make me happy, safe. So what is that source of fullness, completeness? And in the Buddhist way of practicing, it's this understanding that arises when we see things as they are, when we open to the truth, or to dharma, the way it is. Now, some of us have already in this room, I'm sure, had intuitive glimpses, little tastes of the way it is. And it's like we have a moment. It's often hard to articulate, but the flavor of those moments is it's okay for no good reason, right? That like this, all of this is okay. This life, this moment, right? That's the direct affective flavor in our heart, this profound, it's okay. Even though like I'm still a being that was born and is going to die, I still have illness, I still have aging, I still have financial insecurity, I still live in a world where people are being mistreated and harmed. Right? There's all of these things that can be on one level triggering, activating, should be, in a sense, activating. But now, all of that sensitivity and the activation that comes from that sensitivity has to be integrated with a very profound, actual experience. It's okay. That peace, that spiritual peace. And so it sort of begins, it transforms how we relate to the experience of activation. Whatever it is that activates us, the next thing we see in the news, or some difficult interaction with an important person in our lives, or that our cat doesn't want to hang out with us, whatever the activating thing is, but now it's in the context of a heart that's full in the sense it's not feeling empty of love or empty of peace. It's feeling full of love and full of peace. We move through the world differently. I mean, we all know this, because it's not completely one way or the other. Sometimes we're moving through the world and we're really, really needy. And how does that work for us? Everything gets distorted. Everything becomes harder when I'm more desperate, more needy, right? And those times when we feel naturally more full of love, we just find it easier to navigate even the really difficult stuff that comes in life. Something disappointing happens and we roll with it in a way that we wouldn't at another moment. So the practice is really about going to the nth degree of that experience that removes, that interrupts, and eventually causes that sense, that desperate animal sense of needing to be, needing to survive, needing to belong. We don't want to dismiss those very real motives in our heart. We want to understand them. Because the more we understand them, the more we can go beyond them. But we don't want to understand them because it's unpleasant to get close to, our experience of neediness, our experience of loneliness, our experience of being disempowered. Right? This is something that I'm sure many of us are feeling these days as things just keep moving in the wider world. And it's very easy to feel helpless, like, what can we do when it's like this? Well, we can get close to that feeling. That might help us navigate these times, to be real with what we're feeling. I'll just end with this passage that I read from time to time from Ajahn Sushito, one of our elders in our Western Buddhist tradition. He has been a Buddhist monk for maybe 45 years now, a long time, and was the abbot of Chithurst in England for many years. Started his practice in Thailand, ordained with Ajahn Chah, a very well-known Thai Buddhist monk and teacher. And you can find this online. Original Openness is the article. So this is what he says. Openness then is a careful practice rather than an ideology that insists on openness to all people at all times, right? So it's good because we want to turn things into some fixed stance. Okay, I'm going to be open. And then all of a sudden we feel neurotically like we have to oppose people who have, I want to be closed. They're our enemy. But it's really what we use in the tradition, we use that term skillful means. Like I'm going to explore how being open now in this moment might help me navigate my life, feel my way through, not as a fixed truth, but as a skillful means. And he continues writing, misplaced faith and openness or trust that isn't backed up by mindful assessment of what you're putting your faith in is subject to being abused. What is always skillful, however, is to be open to yourself about what's happening to you in the here and now and checking it out in your body and heart. So that sounds like a pretty confident view. And he could, as a Buddhist, he could add, you should check this out. Like, is this true for you? That it's always skillful to be open to yourself about what's happening in the here and now, checking it out in your body and heart. What would be the harm in that? Getting close, being interested, like, what's the feeling here? What am I feeling? How would that not support our skillful navigation of what's going on in the moment? And he writes, maybe there was a threat, but that's past. Maybe you've reached the edge of your capacity to be open and accepting of another. Then something has to be said to let them know that. Thus you replace a pathology with wise navigation. And then a little later in this, he writes, but that's how you wake up. Life is most alive when you can be present at the edge of the unknown. And if there's one way in which the property of the deathless can be experienced right now. So remember, the deathless is the same as the unconditioned, the same as deep insight, right? And if there's one way in which the property of the deathless, deep insight, can be experienced right now, it's in the ability to living free of the heart's contraction of fear, depression, and holding on that comes with the loss of the known. Death, separation, uncertainty, they are all part of life. The Buddhist teaching is that we have the original potential to handle and in fact blossom in the face of these, right? So what we normally use to justify being closed, we're realizing actually, ironically, we need death. We need the messiness of our world, because in our willingness and our fearless capacity to open to the messiness, to open to these primal fears that we're born and then we die, that every one we love will pass, right? What is the heart that can be close to that? The mind that can open to that, right? That's what that's what we practice, to realize the mind and the heart that isn't afraid of including it all, the whole mess, all the uncertainty, all that is unknown. So let me just finish this here. The Buddhist teaching is that we have the original potential to handle and in fact blossom in the face of these. We don't have to feel threatened, anxious, needy, or inadequate. With wise openness, the main causes and conditions for human misery cease. Now that's a provocative statement. How could being open, see, because being open doesn't immediately transform the conditions, whatever one's conditions that are moving our heart right now, whatever we point to. Could be something very local, somebody you love who's really in a bad place. Could be a global situation we point to. But that's why we have to experience this radical openness, and we have every moment to practice with. We don't need different life or different moment. He ends this article, or this passage at least, with this quoting the Buddha, that wide open are the gates to the deathless. Wide open are the gates to fearlessness and love and release. Let those who are willing to listen come forward and listen, right? In other words, we should check this out. Are the gates to the deathless, to real peace, wide open and available? So let's just take a moment, let go of the words, take a breath together to end our time. And thanks for your kind attention. And just a reminder, we have a weekly email that we send out. It's a good way to stay in touch with what's happening at the center. Just send an email to the center, let Gabe know you want to be in that weekly email list, or there is a place on the website to sign up to get on that weekly email list. And I'll be leading a half-day retreat next Saturday, I believe it is. And many things are coming up. Gabe Keller-Flores and Shelley Graff, the other guiding teacher, will be leading a workshop on media, talk about some of the causes for real suffering these days, like wisely relating to our media information world. I forget what Saturday that's on, but it's the mid-Saturday in November. So find that on our online calendar. Everything that's going on is on our public calendar, including the link to register for programs where you need to register. So you can check that out too. Feel free to stay. We're going to have optional small check-in groups now. All of you online, Lucy will be there to help get you into small groups. People here, we have Jenny and Tim and Amanda to help divide folks into small groups. If you want to stay, it's a great way to get to know people in the community. And we end those at 12 noon, so just about 15 minutes. Thanks for coming, everyone. If you have a moment, all the folding chairs, not the black ones, go down the stairs to the right and right.